Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 279 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 13 of The Smallest Magician, and here we go. A couple of days passed with Emby practicing her magic. She particularly worked on her camouflage spell because the assassins were coming for her even more than for Donegal, so she knew that spell had to be perfect. She and Donegal had started to discuss tactics. Under no circumstances are you to engage with them, he said. If they notice you in any way, do your best to slip away. Use the talking stones in any way you feel you need to. I'm working on one more item for you, he said, but I don't want to say anything more about it now because I've never made one, and I've only heard reports of such a thing being made before. Emby was curious, but understood he had said all he would on that subject. 2 days after that conversation, mid-morning, Stephen came back. Again, Emby did not talk with Stephen, but hid and watched the conversation he had with her master. Stephen had managed to get more news. They're already on the way, or so I overheard. They could be here in as little as 3 days. Talking stones, Emby thought. Despite their professed hatred of magic, the Eternal Cross must have used something like the talking stones Donegal had made. After digging for any more information, but finding little, Donegal thanked Stephen and gave him another pouch full of coins. Though time is short, I welcome any further information you can give. If they somehow found a means to get her even sooner, we need to know it. Stephen nodded and took his leave. Emby slipped out from hiding. They're using magic, she said with an accusatory tone. Have to be. Talking stones. Donegal nodded. Yes, they must be. You sound shocked. They hate non-humans, and they hate magic. That's practically all they're known for. Ah, you assume their professed ideals are the ones that they will follow themselves. But when a person or a group covets control and power, then that becomes their one guiding beacon. Everything else is a means to an end. And beside, I understand. On to more important matters, Donegal declared. 3 days at most. I think we can assume they might be here any day. I'll get my people to watch during the days, but are you ready to watch nights? Emby felt unsure, but nodded. I'm glad, Donegal said. I wanted to know if you were confident in your camouflage spell. But I'm coming with you. We will both watch. Not only is it safer, but since the assassins will be after both of us, it's better if we're together, in the house or out. Emby smiled. She was glad her master had some faith in her, but even more glad he was coming. We start tonight, he said. Emby nodded. She knew that would have to be the case, particularly since the timeline had already been cut short. We need to be able to get through the night. How did you sleep last night? Pretty well, Emby said. She slept well every night, to be honest. She wasn't sure why humans had such a difficult time with it. Master Donegal had never asked her about this before, so the question took her a little by surprise. You? Fine, he said, but a little shortly. Emby suspected he hadn't gotten enough sleep. If you're the napping type at all, then nap in the late afternoon. Hopefully we can then stay up through the night. Depending how we feel, we may need to take shifts. I can keep a camouflage spell up while asleep, but I haven't had time to teach you that. I can keep one on you instead. Go practice until lunch. I'll get with Kana and let her know the situation. No one outside the house should be alerted to our change of schedule. I wish I could work on the spelled item I mentioned earlier, but there won't be time now. The day went swiftly. Donegal took a nap in the afternoon, or at least he tried to do so. Emby had never napped, and didn't think it was in her nature to try. She would push through the night if needed. They went out at dusk, using Donegal's horse-drawn wagon. Donegal had explained to Emby that they couldn't let the assassins get into the city at night unspotted, nor could they keep an eye out at the Eternal Cross Church. It was quite possible the assassins would avoid their bosses to prevent any possible connection being made between them. And while it's quite possible they will make their way in by day, I have people along the road watching for that, he said, but we must watch them by night ourselves. And I find that much more likely. Nighttime is an assassin's natural habitat. They likely are going to either time things so they enter the city at night, or simply traveling by night all the way from Stanilo. But they couldn't let them reach the city either. There were too many ways they might go, so the best option was to get outside the city, where there was really only one main road they could take. "There are a few side roads," Donegal admitted to her under his breath, for she was using her camouflage spell, while he was wrapped in a cloak and driving the wagon. But without local help, they could never be sure of finding the right ones. No, they will enter the city by the main road. As they left the city, the dusk was nearly complete, and it was becoming hard to see. Donegal had said that he had a spell that would let him see better in the dark, but that would not help the horse, and he didn't think the spell could be used on the animal. Instead, he lit a lantern, which had metal sides and one glass window, and showed the way ahead with that. They were looking for the right place to stop. "We need to get the wagon and horse off the road, far enough that they aren't likely to hear it, and which also has a good spot for us to use our camouflage spells and watch for them." They fell into silence and watched. Emby grabbed Donegal's sleeve and whispered to him, "On the left side of the road, that meadow, the small hill with a depression behind it." The meadow did have a very slight hill with a bit of a low point behind it, which in the dark seemed like a black pool, but Emby could tell it was not filled with water, but just with shadow. "Yes," Donegal said. "We're close enough to the farms that there aren't likely to be predators around, but if one goes after our horse, we'll hear it intervene. And meanwhile, we have a nice open patch of ground, one where they will never be able to slip by us, even if they're afoot, unless they go hundreds of feet off the road. Well chosen." He turned off the road, and Emby hopped off the wagon, walking up to the horse to lead them on the easiest way across the meadow, avoiding the occasional rock or gopher hole. The wagon and horse were in the low area, and the horse separated from the wagon so it could lie down. It was also connected to a staked line so it could not wander off. They put on their camouflage spells and waited. It was difficult, knowing that if the assassins did not come, they would have to do it possibly over and over again for days or even weeks, until they were spotted by them or one of Donegal's allies, having successfully entered the city during the day, or somehow avoiding their surveillance. But they were fortunate that they had started this process immediately, for Stephen had been right. They had gotten their information early, and they had made their way swiftly towards them. There was a large wagon pulled by 2 horses, with a tent covering the entirety of the thing other than the driver's seat. It was unlike any other wagon Emby had seen before. She took Donegal's arm and squeezed it, but he patted her hand. He had seen it as well. There was a half moon that had risen. She suspected he was using a sight spell as well. Emby saw then that there was someone behind the driver, someone hard to make out in the shadow cast by the tent. But she could tell that someone had a spear. "Spear," she whispered at him. He patted her hand again. He could see that too. "Make no noise," he whispered. She didn't know what he was referring to. She wasn't about to shout out, in case that was the assassins. But she wasn't sure how Donegal could be sure that it was them and not some other traveler. Then, suddenly, there was a flash and a bang in front of the tented wagon, and Emby understood. Donegal was going to flush out whoever it was. If it wasn't the assassins, nothing more would happen. They would continue on, puzzled but unharmed. If it was the assassins, they would know. The noise had startled the 2 horses to a stop, neighing and rearing a bit, though hampered by their harness. The driver was trying to call them with woes. Then, out the back of the wagon came a number of people. They were all cloaked and armed. It was them, the assassins. No one else was traveling on the road that night. And 2 of them were kobolds like Emby. And that's the end of the story for this week. Obviously, the big turn is happening, so yeah, hoping you're enjoying the story. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2022, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.